Welcome to the Heat Pump Week Roundtable sessions. We've brought together a group of leading voices for this local authority and housing association special to discuss how the public sector can scale and finance heat pump rollout across the UK. We're joined by Gemma French from Plug Me In, Katy King from Nesta, Matthew Ling from Suffolk County Council, Anise Mank from Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and Sunny Vashisht from Climate Solutions at Samsung Electronics.
Question number one. What are the challenges that need addressing for local authorities and housing associations to scale heat pump adoption? Would anyone like to go first?
Well, I can start from a local authority perspective. We've got to persuade our tenants and residents to move from what they've been used to over many years, which is a gas boiler, and try something new in the form of a heat pump. And there's a lot of education needed to make that move, and a lot of reassurance that residents need as well in how they will work and what difference they will be seeing in their homes. So that is a big challenge, but we're trying to overcome that as best we can and make that case with our tenants and residents.
What are they most worried about?
Well, there's a number of things. The changeover from what they might have, for example, a combi boiler, often means that they then need to find space for a hot water cylinder. So that's something that they hadn't accounted for many years, and they're now going to have that refitted into their homes. Another is planning the way they heat their hot water as well as the homes. You can't just switch a heat pump on and expect your home to get to temperature very quickly like you can with a gas boiler. So there's a lot more programming and planning involved, and that's a bit of a culture shift for many of our residents.
Yeah. In my experience as working on delivering some of the SHDF funding, previously data has been an issue. I don't know if that is affecting your local authorities, but the asset data that's held regarding the stock portfolios is of times inaccurate, which then obviously puts a difficult situation in terms of bidding for funding, because what we're asking for is not necessarily what is actually needed in the field. Is that something that you're finding?
Yes, definitely. The asset information does need to be up to date so that you know that the property is going to be suitable for a heat pump, and all the fabric measures have been done, and our property is properly insulated and will cope with a low temperature heat pump, and the existing radiators will be suitable, or they may need replacing. So all that information needs to be collected up front through proper surveying of the properties. And like you say, a number of housing providers have got that information ready to hand, but others are still needing to do that piece of work, and it needs to be done in advance so that they can put that information into any government funding bids as they come along.
Yeah.
And have you found it challenging, especially in terrace houses, to find the space for a heat pump, especially with the current planning regulations of it being needed to about a metre away from the boundary line?
Yeah, so the terraced houses are a challenge, like you say. The space isn't there, plus the noise requirements, as you mentioned. There was a recent consultation out from the government to try and relax the limited development requirements of the planning legislation. So we wait to see the outcome of that, and hopefully that will make it easier to install heat pumps in smaller properties where there isn't the room outside. So at the moment, the majority of installations are going into semi-detached properties where there is that space available.
I think it...
Sorry,
go on.
No, you're okay.
I was going to say, I think it's definitely needed, especially for terrace, especially when there's, 6.9 million terrace properties are the most common type of house type. I think it's 26% of all house types in the UK. Yeah. So if we can't overcome that for the terrace properties, it's going to be a big challenge in sort of moving them over to heat pumps.
Yeah. In terms of funding, clearly one of the biggest challenges that local authorities have got at the moment. We know money's tight. How do we upscale when the investment is so significant? In terms of SHDF Wave 2, I think there was only around 10% of local authorities and combined authorities and associations that were actually awarded any funding, which from the over 4 million housing stock we've got in the social housing sector is very, very minuscule. what kind of thought processes are behind how that would be sort of delivered at scale in terms of utilising the private sector, for example, like Plug Me In, who are looking to want to drive sort of scaling of delivery across the UK. Is that something that's...
So for me in Suffolk, we're not doing an awful lot of work on the social housing. There is social housing work going on, but from the work I've been involved with HUG, the finances and the hoops that need to be jumped through for a relatively small amount of funding and a relatively small amount of number of houses means that you can't scale up.
Yeah.
There's not the funding to do it, and also because you need to look at the fabric first. So when there's significant deficit in terms of investment, in terms of the actual insulation, before you even get to thinking about the heat, the decarb bit, then I think that's a real issue. So, if you do the calculations, even within a rural county like Suffolk or East Anglia, you find that it's a huge amount of money to sort out the insulation, the energy efficiency before you can start thinking about the decarbonisation, before you can change that. And so I think that's one of the challenges, is that we don't have funding ourselves. The government doesn't seem historically to want to give that funding, so you're a bit stuck. You've got to pick off the ones you can do. So for the HUG stuff, the home upgrade funding, it's been oil-based boilers where there's some benefit of doing it, some financial benefit of doing it. But certainly in our gas-fired properties, we've done very little in terms of heat pumps because it doesn't stack up financially for either the funding programmes or for the householders, really.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It is one of the biggest challenges, as I say, in getting that finance support there. So I think we need to look at working innovatively and collaboratively with the private sector to look at what investment infrastructure can potentially be put towards a decarbonisation across the United Kingdom.
And for private sector housing, the boiler upgrade scheme has been really successful when it got pushed up to £7,500. And we're finding in Greater Manchester we then have cost parity with the boiler replacement now. So for the around £2,500 extra, you can move from a gas boiler to a heat pump, which is a similar cost to replacing it with a like-for-like gas boiler. And that's made a real difference for homeowners who want to make that move.
Yeah, that's been really good, isn't it? I have to admit, I personally have done the same. I had a quote for the gas boiler replacement, which is 40 years old and probably an efficiency of, I don't know, minus 20. The cost was pretty much the same. So I did that, replaced all the radiators. I didn't enjoy the insulating of the loft, I have to say. I spent some very unhappy evenings getting 300 millimetres of insulation in there. But cost-wise, I worked it out and I thought, this works. I think also within there's the whole house bit. So for me, there was the motivation of the low carbon and the climate change stuff. But also I know a lot of people look at the costs, so we also went for battery installation as well and solar. So over the year, the cost is probably about on a par with what we are paying for an inefficient gas boiler. But to look at the big picture of the whole house and all those different technologies, it is expensive. And your question about finance, it doesn't tend to do that. So, interest-free loans is one way that we're looking at within Suffolk of providing, the private sector to actually be able to access it.
So it's something that Plug Me In are looking at, is to come up with a product offering where we can do private sector financing with zero upfront costs for the local authorities and for the registered providers, to see if we can then start to mobilise something significant at scale, because obviously we have the investment to put in there. We're wanting to take that from not just a financial perspective, but then through to the design, installation, the management and the servicing. So it's almost like a one full-stop shop to see how we can overcome the lengthy applications, as you say, the resources that it takes internally for local authorities and RPs to apply for this SHDF funding, and then the constraints that sometimes they fear when they actually are awarded the money. If they then find stock holding isn't exactly as they've put in their reports, are they then liable for sunk costs? Are they then liable for not being able to draw down the funding for the energy efficiency measures? So it's how we can work together to overcome those barriers that we're currently finding.
I think for consumers as well, it's not just the upfront cost, it's the running costs as well.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it's hard to claim that you will save. However, with the new tariffs, and particularly the heat pump tariffs, you really can save a lot. And I think that's something that isn't widely understood. And there's more that can be done to help people understand that they are likely will save, and particularly if they get solar and a battery?
I think some of the challenges with that, though, is the energy providers are expecting to get access to those tariffs. They have to do the installs, when there's a whole load of private installers that obviously want to do that themselves as well. So there's a sort of a competing market there.
Lovely. Does someone want to take the next question?
Okay, so where do we need government intervention, and where can private business push the needle?
So I think we've covered that slightly in the first question, didn't we? But certainly in terms of financing, infrastructure, lease agreements, third-party ownership of products to sort of plug the gap of the financial burden that's currently facing the RPs and the local housing authorities. So I think working in collaboration and partnership with the private sector has to be a key. It has to form part of the DNA, partnership working to be able to roll anything out at scale. We've got to come together. In terms of sort of the government intervention from my perspective, I think it's maybe a little bit more guidance around maybe the past 2035, because it's open to interpretation. It's specifically limits properties as an archetype, and I think sometimes decarbonisation doesn't fit all properties, so it doesn't necessarily allow for you to look outside of the box, for example. So potentially sort of lobbying a little bit of change towards the available sort of briefings that we're getting down with the frameworks, and I think we are learning a lot from previous waves of funding as to how we can do that as well.
So is the financing on each archetype actually precluding the installation of heat pumps and other measures, because it's actually restricting because the buildings just are not fit for purpose?
Yeah, or the asset data tells them that it is a specific wall type or cavity, and when actually the survey gets carried out, that isn't factual. So then the cost for the investment into that property then supersedes what they've bid for, or the measure's already there. So therefore, they can't deliver that energy efficiency measure, which then obviously...
And I presume historic buildings fall within part of that ecosystem as well.
Yeah, I would assume so. And then they have to do things like business change requests, and that slows down the scheme. Then you're at risk of not delivering on time. So there's lots of red tape, so to speak, that come with the frameworks, and it's how we can learn from.
Okay, so with the HUG programme that we've been working with, it's incredibly bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And we don't have any freedom really to work with anything. I don't know what other people find with the SHDF or other things, whether you have the I suppose the autonomy to get on and do it without having to keep on going back to government funders, the change requests and everything else are hugely time-consuming.
They're all constricted in the same way.
They constrain actually doing things.
Yes, yeah, that's been the feedback.
That's right. I think SHDF is a bit more freer than HUG in terms of the processing of change requests, and we normally get a response within 4 weeks, and usually it is an approval if we manage to answer all the questions from the department. But in Greater Manchester, we're looking forward to a devolution deal, Trailblazer devolution deal, which will hopefully free us up even further and allow us to set local eligibility criteria based on our needs and priorities. And once that's in place, we should be able to make those local decisions without having to keep asking for permission to do something slightly differently and implement our learning from existing schemes in a much more speedier fashion.
Okay. So for your Eco4 and statement of intent and all those sort of things, the government's put a very clear template together in terms of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And although it's called EcoFlex, there's very little flex in our experience in terms of being able to go outside that. So are you saying that you expect to be able to push that aside and define it yourself in terms of what's acceptable?
Eco isn't currently in scope for the devolution deal.
Okay.
We've asked for it to be, but I think it's going to be incremental steps. So originally we are going to have a social housing decarb fund and the proposed local authority retrofit scheme for private sector housing, LARS for short, and that if those two get devolved, we'll be able to make a good start on this, and then hopefully Eco can follow. But like yourselves, we've pretty much adopted the template that's been provided for LA Flex, and it's been working fine for our residents. It has been well designed and researched for a urban area like ourselves, but I recognise it might not be suitable for all areas.
Nesta's been doing a lot of research on the idea of coordinated switching, which could be a whole street or an area that could be a mix of social housing, private tenancies, people that own their own properties. How could they be given an offer from government or local government on how, as a group, they could switch? So really smoothing the journey for everyone. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're really interested in exploring further. And particularly, it would be great if government could do some piloting of that kind of approach. Potentially people having shared ground source loops, or maybe air source heat pumps independently. We've just seen in Essex, they've just launched a group buying programme, Essex County Council. So that's really exciting to see the first local government-led group buying programme in the UK through Switch Together. So it'll be very interesting to see the results of that and whether that's something that could be replicated around the UK.
Yeah, scale it out.
So is that a community buying scheme, or is that a sort of a county buying scheme?
So how it works, it's the same as Solar Together. I don't know if you've seen where essentially people, they might have something put through the door saying you might be suitable, are you interested? And then they express interest. They then have an auction where they have all the people who have expressed interest, and local suppliers can bid to be the deliverer. And the idea is you get a good deal because you're grouped together. It's 1 in 10 solar panels have been installed by Solar Together in the UK.
It's amazing, isn't
So,
it?
yeah.
That number is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's exciting to see. Could the same happen with heat pumps? I think Nesta thinks that government does need to intervene and does need to try different models. So maybe it is able to pay all grouping together and group buying, but maybe it's more that shared ground loop. You really need to work with all the different people in that area. So it might be grouping, social housing, able to pay, and somehow offering some kind of financing to those people, and that they could switch within a period of time. But at the moment, I think people don't have the confidence to do it. And we think potentially being zoned, told that you're in a certain zone that should have the ground source, for example, then that might give people the confidence, plus it being badged by government.
Does any of that relate also to the tariffs in terms of electricity and gas, in that electricity is 3 times per unit cost-wise from gas, and therefore there's a lack of parity there?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the big government intervention that we'd like to see, is rebalancing the levies. So essentially the fact that eco and things like that are funded through levies on electricity, it would be great to see some kind of rebalancing so that electricity became cheaper. I think we've got the most expensive electricity in Europe at the moment.
I think just to finalise that one, in terms of, I think we need a better delivery from the stop-start that we keep getting with the funding that is available for decarbonisation schemes. So 1 minute we seem to be able to be delivering at pace under like Eco4, for example, then the funding's pulled and it's stopped, and then that affects the sector, that affects the industry, it affects the consumer.
It's been a nightmare because some of our installers have refused to engage new staff because of the way the funding, and where government has extended programmes. Hug was a good example. Programme finished on the 31st of March. They extended it on the 31st of March. That gives no confidence to the market, gives no confidence to a local authority trying to deliver it. 2-year, 1-year programmes are not enough. It needs to be 5-year, 10-year programmes.
So I think we definitely need some direction with that. Sonny, do you want to?
I was just going to say on that, from a manufacturer's point of view, we do need some long-term policies from the government, because they're asking they're asking the industry to reach 600,000 heat pumps by 2028. We're 3 years away, nearly at the end of 2024. We're doing probably a sixth of that, if that, this year. So having that big ramp up in those next few years, they need to have some good policies that have some strategic goals in place to actually reach that, instead of doing these stop and start with the different fundings and the different things, because then it will give us as manufacturers the confidence to say, right, if you've got these clear goals in place, we'll deliver the units that you need.
Okay, yeah. And I read today that the development time for new products is 3 to 5 years. So if the funding is only 1 to 2 years, I don't know how a manufacturer can plan in terms of investment in long term.
Exactly that. Yeah, it takes a lot of R&D to develop these types of products as well. So how can we build confidence amongst consumers about the long-term value of heat pumps?
Education.
I was going to say, Nesta's done a lot in this space, and we have our visit a heat pump scheme. So there's over 400 locations that people can visit a heat pump. Heat pump owners are just opening up their doors and opening up their gardens for people to go and visit. And we've had over 850 people visit it since March, and we have a steady stream every week. People are conducting these visits, and the things they're asking about are planning, they're asking about running costs, and they just want someone who's like them to show them their heat pump and say, it's been great, I'd recommend it. And most people have never seen a heat pump in real life, so it's a scheme that at least gives people that opportunity to ask questions. At the same time, in the media, unless you read certain outlets, there's not that much mention of heat pumps. Like the fact that we're meant to have 1 in 10 people or households with a heat pump by 2030, that's not really reflected in the media. There are more mentions of banana bread on TV than there are of heat pumps at the moment, and that's something that really needs to change.
Yeah, so communication, engagement, and connecting with the audiences that we want to empower to want to come on board with this green initiative.
I love the idea of the visitor heat pump. I know since we've had ours installed, everybody that comes to the house says, tell us about it, show all the working, show us the technology, show us the app, and it just helps get away with eliminate some of the myths as well. Doesn't it cost much? Isn't it too noisy? And that relates also to the planning stuff of the government, doesn't it? In terms of conservation areas, listed buildings, all those things are really quite restrictive, and probably more restrictive than they need to be, in my view. But visitor heat pump, I think that's great.
Yeah, we're just opening up the ability for installers as well to sign up and put their listings on there, so they can encourage, if they have someone who's interested, they've quoted, they can then signpost, these are my installs on the platform, get in touch with them, which I think, again, it's a way of, when there's sometimes not much trust in the industry and with installers, it's a way that they can build that trust and get people to sign and move ahead. I think we hear a lot, there's a big gap between people interested and getting quotes and actually moving forwards. So we think things like Visit Heat Pump can hopefully help people to have the confidence.
It is quite difficult to know where to go, isn't it, in supply though? So to have people who already put heat pumps in, who've used the supplier and can actually vouch for them is quite important, isn't it?
Definitely, and I think it's something, consumer protection is so important. It's something that we really want to see strengthened, because as local authorities or social housing, you want to make sure that what you're installing, people do have a good experience, they are protected, and if something goes wrong, they know where to turn.
Yeah, so in addition to boosting confidence with consumers, we also need to boost confidence with installers, and particularly gas engineers who've fitted gas boilers for the whole of their career and now need to move on to something different. So that training and engagement with engineers in particular, telling them that it isn't that difficult to make the switch and what benefits it can bring to their business as well. That all needs to be part of the package of education, I think.
Yeah, so that works in linking with the education stuff as well. So our local education college plus 2 of our suppliers have almost set up their own rooms where they can train people in terms of from their plumbers, so the plumbers know what they're looking at and the expectations. But yeah, to have the right people with the right skills is important as well, isn't it?
Definitely.
That's where we've, at Samsung, we've supported a few colleges with product and supporting them with the training schemes as well. So I've got colleagues at a college today actually launching it. And that's where we're sort of going from the people sort of entering colleges, actually choosing and seeing a heat pump and saying, right, that's what I want to go and do. I want to go and install heat pumps instead of going down the route of just, well, let's install gas boilers now. We need those young people coming in and actually training to be heat pump installers.
Definitely. I mean, we find one of the barriers people have said is that to get your first install that's MCS accredited can be a barrier because you can't get the grant unless you're MCS accredited. So what Nesta's piloting is, with SNP-F in Scotland, we've offered to plumbers, if they want to train to be heat pump engineers, we'll give them a free heat pump that they can install in their own home. They can then get that MCS accredited, and then they can, we're sort of overcoming that barrier, and hopefully, as you found, you become an advocate once you've got one and you realise how great they are. So we're piloting that. People are getting their free heat pumps very soon. And it's something we hope could become a useful way to turn people into advocates for heat pumps.
Fantastic.
My turn? Okay. So in one sentence, summarise the key changes needed to install heat pumps on a national scale. That's a challenge for you.
I'll go first. For myself, I think what we need is an increase in collaboration. I think partnership working is key to be able to mobilise anything at scale. I think communication, again, needs to be increased, and we need to be communicating more fluidly across the different sectors that are involved with renewables for housing. And I think commitment is needed. We really need to draw down and stick to the commitment in what we are going to deliver. And almost sort of stopping the conversation and actually getting out there and delivering something.
Okay, I can go next. I think for heat pumps, it's often a distress purchase situation that people find themselves in when they get to considering what they want to do next with their heating system. And so I think residents in particular need to take advantage of Heat Pump Week and the like to get themselves educated on what heat pumps are, how they work, and how they would fit in their home, and what changes they would need to make to their home to make them suitable for heat pumps. So when the time comes to switch from your boiler, you've got all that information to hand, and you're not panicking about getting the quickest install in place, which might be another boiler that locks you in for another 15 years with fossil fuel heating.
I'd say, in my opinion, there needs to be quite a few changes. So probably the first one is sort of long-term policies from the government, and then also on top of that, actual heat pump campaigns to get the end users or homeowners more aware of what heat pumps are, what they do, how they work. In terms of the training for the existing gas engineers, so there needs to be a lot of upskilling in the industry, getting them ready to install heat pump, understanding how to design the systems, design good quality systems, install them correctly, and that's where you need the collaboration with the sort of the manufacturers driving that in terms of our training to them, as well as sort of the colleges and the government setting up schemes as well.
I think there are three things that Nesta would like to see. Planning rules relaxed, levies rebalanced, and finally some pilots of coordinated switching.
Well, I suppose from my perspective, it comes down to the user understanding the benefits, whether that's financial, whether that's comfort, whether that's carbon, and them understanding why they should be doing it. I think that has to be underpinned by consistent funding and government policy to allow it to continue like that. So whether that's the price of gas or electricity, whether that's making sure there's a real investment in the retrofit of the fabric, because we need to do that, and that needs always to come first. But unless there's consistent funding over a period of 5, 10, 15 years from government, we're not going to see the take-up that we actually need to give the benefits.
Thank you for watching this Heat Pump Week Roundtable session. If you have any questions on the subjects explored, please post them below. To view more sessions on the strategic pathway to mass heat pump adoption and preparing the workforce to deliver heat pumps at scale, please visit our channel. Thank you to Plug Me In for their support in making these sessions possible.